Shivering in darkness, he counted pennies for bread. Once commanding billions, Gregory now battled rats for scraps in alleyways, his designer suits replaced by tattered rags. Ex-billionaire homeless isn't just a headline. It's the crushing reality he faced until Rosa's shocking secret emerged from shadows. The truth she harbored would either save him or destroy them both. Gregory Lancaster stared at his reflection in a rain puddle, barely recognizing the gaunt, bearded face looking back at him. 6 months ago, he had been featured on the cover of Forbes, celebrated as one of the most innovative financial minds of his generation, with a personal fortune estimated at just over $3 billion. Now, he pulled the threadbare blanket, salvaged from a dumpster behind a hotel, tighter around his shoulders as the autumn wind cut through his inadequate layers, carrying the promise of a bitter winter to come. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had once owned a penthouse in this very neighborhood, had dined at the 5-star restaurant whose kitchen staff now occasionally slipped him leftovers if he timed his appearance with their smoke breaks. The financial scandal had been meticulously orchestrated, that much he knew. Every detail had been planned to perfection, emails fabricated, transactions backdated, whistleblowers bribed, all pointing to Gregory as the mastermind behind a massive Ponzi scheme that had cost investors hundreds of millions. His attempts to defend himself had been futile against the mountain of evidence, his legal team abandoning him one by one as his accounts were frozen and his assets seized. The betrayal cut deeper than the loss of money. Colleagues who had shared holidays at his Hampton estate now crossed the street to avoid him. Women who had eagerly accepted his dinner invitations now pretended not to recognize him. And even his so-called friends had vanished like morning dew under a harsh sun. Hunger had become his constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that never fully subsided regardless of the scraps he managed to find. Pride had been the first casualty of his new existence. Pride died quickly when facing starvation, followed by dignity, as he learned to rifle through garbage bins after restaurant closing times. Sleep came in fitful bursts, always alert for the dangers that preyed upon the homeless, thieves looking for the few possessions worth taking, police officers conducting sweeps to clear the streets for tourists, and the random cruelty of bored teenagers with something to prove. Gregory had learned these lessons the hard way, nursing a cracked rib for weeks after refusing to surrender his only photograph of his deceased parents to a gang demanding street tax. The most painful adjustment had been the invisibility, the way people's eyes slid past him as if he were merely an unfortunate piece of urban furniture, something to be navigated around but never acknowledged. He had once commanded rooms full of powerful executives with a single word, had been courted by politicians seeking donations and entrepreneurs desperate for investment. Now, he could stand on a busy corner for hours, cup extended, and be seen by no one. Occasionally, this invisibility served as a strange comfort. At least in anonymity, he was spared the public humiliation of being recognized as the disgraced financial titan who had allegedly stolen from widows and pension funds. Tonight would be particularly difficult, Gregory knew, as dark clouds gathered overhead, and the weather report he'd overheard from a passing pedestrian's phone mentioned severe thunderstorms. The underpass where he had established a semi-permanent shelter was likely already claimed by others seeking refuge from the impending downpour. He would need to find alternative accommodation, perhaps the doorway of the closed bookstore 3 blocks down, which offered minimal protection but was usually overlooked by both the homeless population and patrol officers. As he gathered his meager possessions, a tattered backpack containing a spare shirt, a dog-eared paperback, and a toothbrush missing half its bristles, Gregory wondered not for the first time if death might be preferable to this half-existence. The first fat raindrop landed on his forehead just as he heard someone call his name, not his street name, Professor. which the other homeless had dubbed him after hearing him quote Shakespeare during a feverish night, but his actual name. Mr. Lancaster, Gregory Lancaster. The voice was familiar somehow, a ghost from his previous life, and he turned slowly, expecting another humiliation. Perhaps a former investor come to spit in his face or take a mocking photograph. Instead, he found himself looking into the kind, concerned eyes of Rosa Mendez, who had served as the head housekeeper in his Manhattan penthouse for nearly 7 years before the scandal broke, and his staff was dismissed along with everything else. Rosa couldn't believe the transformation before her eyes. Though she had been searching the streets for weeks, following rumors and second-hand sightings of the man who had once been her employer. Gregory Lancaster, the man who had paid for her mother's cataract surgery without hesitation, when she had nervously mentioned the upcoming procedure, who remembered her birthday each year with thoughtful gifts rather than impersonal cash bonuses, who had insisted she take paid leave when her brother was hospitalized after an accident, stood before her like a spectre from another dimension. His once powerful frame had withered to a skeletal silhouette. His previously immaculate salt-and-pepper hair hung in greasy clumps around his hollow cheeks, and the tailored suit she had carefully steamed each morning had been replaced by layers of mismatched, filthy clothing, scavenged from charity bins. The rain was falling steadily now, plastering Gregory's hair to his scalp and running in rivulets down his weathered face, making it impossible to tell if the moisture on his cheeks was precipitation or tears. Rosa stepped forward, her umbrella extended to shelter them both, ignoring the curious glances from passing pedestrians, hurrying to escape the worsening storm. "Mr. Lancaster, I've been looking everywhere for you," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside her. "Please, come with me. You shouldn't be out here in this weather. I have an apartment nearby, nothing fancy, but it's dry and warm, and there's hot food waiting." She expected resistance, had prepared arguments to counter his pride or suspicion, but instead saw something flicker in his eyes that broke her heart. A combination of disbelief and desperate hope, so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. The walk to Rosa's modest 2-bedroom apartment in a pre-war building on the unfashionable edge of the neighborhood took less than 15 minutes, but for Gregory, it felt like crossing an international border, a passage from one reality to another. Each step took him further from the harsh world of survival that had been his existence for months and closer to forgotten comforts. Shelter, warmth, safety. Rosa maintained a respectful silence during their journey, occasionally placing a gentle hand on his elbow to guide him around puddles or steady him when exhaustion made him stumble. Her touch, the first human contact not born of violence or necessity he had experienced in months, sent confusing waves of emotion through his depleted body. Gratitude, shame, relief, and a fragile, dangerous sensation he dared not name as hope. Rosa's apartment was exactly as she had described, modest but immaculately clean, with furniture that spoke of careful budgeting rather than design aspirations, and walls adorned with family photographs rather than artwork. The scent of simmering stew permeated the space, triggering such an intense physical reaction in Gregory that he swayed slightly, his stomach cramping painfully in anticipation of nourishment. "The bathroom is through there," Rosa said, gesturing to a door off the small hallway. "I've left clean towels, a new toothbrush, and some clothes that should fit you. They belong to my cousin who stayed with me last year. Take as long as you need. I'll have food ready when you come out." The simple kindness of her practical arrangements, presented without pity or judgment, undid the last of Gregory's fragile composure, and he nodded mutely, unable to find words adequate to express the tumult of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. The transformation that occurred in the bathroom was almost mystical in nature, the shedding of one identity and the tentative reclamation of another. Gregory stood under the hot shower for what felt like hours, watching months of grime spiral down the drain, scrubbing his skin until it was pink and raw, as if he could wash away not just the physical evidence of his fall, but the psychological trauma as well. The steam cleared his sinuses and lungs, which had grown accustomed to the persistent cough that came from sleeping in damp conditions. He shaved with a new razor Rosa had left alongside basic toiletries, revealing a face he barely recognized. Thinner, certainly, with new lines etched by hardship, but still fundamentally his. The clothes fit well enough: clean jeans, a flannel shirt, thick socks, simple garments that nevertheless felt like royal robes compared to the layers of filthy rags he had grown accustomed to wearing. When Gregory finally emerged from the bathroom, he found Rosa setting 2 bowls of beef stew on a small dining table, alongside a loaf of crusty bread and a carafe of water. She looked up as he entered, and a soft smile transformed her face, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "There he is," she said simply, as if greeting an expected dinner guest, rather than a formerly homeless man she had rescued from the streets. "Please sit and eat while it's hot. We can talk afterward." Gregory lowered himself carefully into the chair, suddenly conscious of his body in a way he hadn't been for months, aware of how his movements might appear to another person rather than focused solely on efficiency and survival. He lifted the spoon with a hand that trembled slightly, took a first bite of the rich stew, and closed his eyes as flavors exploded across his palate. The simple meal, more satisfying than any Michelin-starred restaurant offering from his previous life. After dinner, as Gregory sat nursing a cup of hot tea that seemed to warm not just his body, but some frozen part of his soul, Rosa finally revealed the truth that had been burning inside her for months. "Mr. Lancaster, Gregory, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the worn wooden table. "I never believed the accusations against you, not for a single moment. I worked in your home for 7 years. I saw how you lived, how you treated people, the values you held. The man I knew could never have done the things they claimed." Her eyes, when they met his, held such unwavering certainty that Gregory felt something shift inside him. The first loosening of the bitter resignation that had calcified around his heart since the scandal broke and his world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The revelation that followed stunned Gregory into silence so profound he could hear the ticking of the modest wall clock and the distant sounds of traffic filtering through the windows. Rosa had not only disbelieved the allegations against him, but she had also been actively working to clear his name since the day the scandal broke. "I've been saving money for years," she explained, pulling a small notebook from a drawer and placing it before him. "Not just from my salary with you, but from every job I've ever had. My parents lived through terrible poverty in their homeland, and they taught me to always put something aside for emergencies. When you lost everything, I knew this was the emergency I had been saving for, though not one I could have ever imagined." The notebook contained meticulous records of her savings, over $70,000 accumulated through decades of careful frugality, money she had dedicated to helping the man who had once signed her paychecks. More astonishing than the financial revelation was the network Rosa had built during the months following Gregory's downfall. As his former housekeeper, she had been invisible to the powerful people who had frequented his home, the financial executives, the lawyers, the business partners who had abandoned him at the first sign of trouble. Those same people spoke freely in front of her, as if she were merely another piece of furniture, sharing information they would have guarded carefully in other contexts. "They forgot I existed the moment I finished serving their drinks or taking their coats," Rosa explained, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "But I remembered everything I heard, and I started connecting the dots." She had leveraged her position as a domestic worker in other wealthy households to gather snippets of conversation, rumors, indiscreet comments made by intoxicated executives who never considered that the woman refilling their whiskey glass might be building a case to exonerate the man they had helped destroy. The evidence Rosa had compiled was substantial, though scattered. Financial discrepancies that didn't align with the official narrative, timeline inconsistencies that suggested fabricated documents, and most significantly, a pattern of suspicious transactions benefiting a small group of Gregory's former associates in the weeks before the scandal broke. "I don't have definitive proof yet," she admitted, spreading printouts of emails and financial records across the table, "but I have enough to establish reasonable doubt, enough to interest a good investigative journalist or an ambitious prosecutor looking to make a name by uncovering a conspiracy." Gregory examined the documents with growing amazement, his trained financial mind, dulled by months of focusing solely on survival, gradually re-engaging with the complex web Rosa had uncovered. There, in her cramped apartment, surrounded by evidence gathered by the one person who had believed in his innocence when the entire world turned against him, Gregory felt the first genuine stirring of possibility since his downfall. What moved Gregory beyond words was not just the evidence Rosa had gathered, but the risk she had taken in doing so. "These people destroyed your life without hesitation," she said quietly, refilling his teacup. "They wouldn't think twice about doing the same to a housekeeper who threatened their position. I've been careful, using public computers for research, paying cash for copies, never revealing my connection to you. But if they discovered what I've been doing—" She left the sentence unfinished, but Gregory understood the implications perfectly. This woman, who owed him nothing, who had already been collateral damage in his destruction when she lost her job after his assets were seized, had risked her safety, her livelihood, perhaps even her freedom, on the slim chance of proving his innocence. The realization humbled him in a way that even homelessness had not, confronting him with a quality of loyalty he had never truly experienced despite all his previous wealth and power. As the night deepened outside the windows of Rosa's apartment, they formulated the beginnings of a plan. Gregory's financial expertise, combined with Rosa's gathered intelligence and connections among the household staff of New York's elite, created a potentially powerful alliance. "We'll need legal help eventually," Gregory acknowledged, his voice growing stronger as purpose replaced despair. "But first, we need more concrete evidence, something irrefutable that ties the conspiracy together." Rosa nodded in agreement, adding, "I can access some of these households through friends who still work there. With specific targets and documents to look for, we might find what we need." As they talked, mapping out next steps and potential pitfalls, Gregory realized that for the first time since his arrest, he was thinking beyond mere survival to something he had abandoned months ago: a future. The transformation of Gregory Lancaster from homeless survivor to active investigator didn't happen overnight. The habits and traumas of street life didn't simply disappear because he now had shelter and an ally. For the first week in Rosa's spare bedroom, he startled awake multiple times each night, disoriented and panicking at finding himself indoors. Convinced he had trespassed and would face consequences, he hoarded food in his pockets during meals, an instinctive behavior born from months of not knowing when he would eat again. His nerves remained raw, his trust fragile as blown glass, and his confidence, once legendary in business circles, virtually non-existent. Rosa witnessed these struggles with compassionate understanding, never commenting when she found bread rolls carefully wrapped in napkins under his pillow during morning cleaning, or when he flinched at unexpected sounds or movements. Slowly, however, as proper nutrition and regular sleep began to restore his physical health, Gregory's formidable intellect reawakened from its survival-focused hibernation. Rosa had arranged a small workspace in the corner of her living room, a folding table, a second-hand laptop purchased from a pawn shop with cash to avoid digital trails, and organized folders containing all the evidence she had gathered. Gregory spent hours there, analyzing financial statements, cross-referencing dates and transactions, applying the same analytical skills that had once built his fortune to now unraveling the conspiracy that destroyed it. As patterns emerged from the chaos of data, he began to identify key players and critical moments in the scheme that had framed him, sketching complex relationship maps on large sheets of paper that soon covered an entire wall of Rosa's apartment. The central figure in their investigation quickly became Martin Thorne, Gregory's former CFO and most trusted lieutenant. The betrayal cut deeper than any other aspect of the scandal. Martin had been more than an employee. He had been a friend, or so Gregory had believed. They had built the company together from a small investment firm to a global financial powerhouse, had shared family holidays and personal milestones, had stood as godfather to each other's children. Yet the evidence Rosa had gathered pointed unequivocally to Martin as the architect of Gregory's downfall, revealing a pattern of secret meetings and communications with competing firms in the weeks before the scandal broke. He was positioning himself, Gregory realized as they reviewed bank statements showing substantial offshore transfers to accounts linked to Martin's family members. He orchestrated my removal so he could step into my position while simultaneously weakening the company enough that it could be acquired at a fraction of its value by Cambridge Financial, with him guaranteed a controlling interest in the new entity. Rosa's network of domestic workers proved invaluable as their investigation progressed. As Gregory had once explained to a business reporter, the true power of any organization lies not in its executives, but in its infrastructure, the people who make the system function day to day while receiving fraction of the credit. This philosophy, which had made him unusually popular among support staff during his rise to power, now served him in unexpected ways. Maids, chauffeurs, personal assistants, and household cooks across Manhattan's elite residences became their eyes and ears, sharing overheard conversations and occasionally photographing documents left carelessly on desks or nightstands. One particularly valuable piece of evidence came from a caterer working a private dinner at Martin's Hamptons estate, who managed to record a conversation in which Martin explicitly discussed the fabricated evidence used against Gregory with the CEO of Cambridge Financial. The most dangerous phase of their investigation involved accessing digital records that could definitively prove the conspiracy. Rosa had discovered through her network that Martin kept encrypted files on a private server in his Manhattan penthouse, files that likely contained the original financial documents that had been altered to implicate Gregory. "We need those files," Gregory insisted during one of their strategy sessions. "Everything else is circumstantial, enough to raise questions, but not enough to clear my name completely. Those files would be the smoking gun." Rosa agreed but emphasized the immense risk. Gaining access to Martin's penthouse would require more than just her connections among household staff. It would necessitate a carefully orchestrated deception with potentially serious legal consequences if discovered. The ethical implications troubled them both. They were fighting to expose corruption, yet considering methods that skirted legality themselves. Their opportunity came unexpectedly through Rosa's cousin Miguel, who worked for the security company that had recently upgraded the system in Martin's building. The residents were all informed that there would be a final system test next Tuesday evening between 7 and 9 p.m., Miguel explained during a furtive meeting in Rosa's kitchen. "All security protocols will be briefly suspended during that window. Standard procedure during system resets, and temporary keycards have been issued to the testing team." The plan that formed was precarious. Miguel could provide a duplicate temporary keycard, giving them access to the building during the testing window. Rosa, who had occasionally filled in for Martin's regular housekeeper during staff shortages before the scandal, knew the layout of the penthouse and the likely location of the home office where the private server would be housed. Gregory, with his technical expertise, could extract the necessary files if they could gain access to the system. On the evening of the operation, Gregory stood before the mirror in Rosa's bathroom, barely recognizing himself in the security company uniform Miguel had provided. The past weeks had restored some of his physical health. Proper nutrition had begun to fill out the hollows in his cheeks, and regular sleep had diminished the dark circles under his eyes. But the man staring back at him was fundamentally changed from the confident tycoon whose image had once graced magazine covers. This Gregory Lancaster was leaner, harder, his eyes holding a wariness that came from understanding how quickly life could be upended, how tenuous privilege truly was. As he straightened the unfamiliar tie, Rosa appeared in the doorway behind him, similarly attired in the uniform she would wear to pose as part of the security testing team. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly, concern evident in her expression. Gregory met her gaze in the mirror and nodded once, his jaw set with determination. "I've lost everything once already," he said quietly. "The only thing I have left to lose is this chance at redemption. Let's go." The security breach at Martin Thorne's penthouse proceeded with a precision that belied the amateur nature of their operation, a testament to Rosa's meticulous planning and Gregory's ability to perform under pressure despite months of psychological trauma. The temporary keycard worked exactly as Miguel had promised, granting them access to the private elevator that whisked them directly to the penthouse level during the system testing window. Martin, as Rosa had confirmed through her network, was attending a charity gala that evening and wouldn't return until well after midnight, giving them nearly 2 hours to locate and extract the incriminating files. The opulence of the penthouse, with its panoramic views of Central Park, museum-quality artwork and custom furnishings, struck Gregory not with envy, but with a strange detachment, as if he were viewing artifacts from a civilization he had once inhabited but no longer understood or coveted. The private server was exactly where Rosa had predicted, housed in a temperature-controlled cabinet within Martin's home office, behind a hidden panel in the bookshelf that she had observed him accessing during her occasional substitutions for his regular housekeeper. Gregory worked methodically, connecting his laptop to the server and deploying a series of sophisticated decryption algorithms he had developed years earlier during the company's expansion into cybersecurity investments. "Financial criminals always follow patterns," he murmured as his fingers flew across the keyboard. "Martin helped design our security protocols. He would use variations of the same encryption methods out of habit, even believing them to be unbreakable." His confidence proved justified when the server yielded its secrets after 47 tense minutes, revealing folder after folder of damning evidence. The original financial documents alongside their fraudulently altered versions, emails outlining the conspiracy between Martin and executives at Cambridge Financial, and most devastatingly, recorded conversations in which they explicitly discussed framing Gregory and dividing the spoils of their orchestrated takeover. The wealth of evidence exceeded their most optimistic expectations, providing not just proof of Gregory's innocence, but comprehensive documentation of a conspiracy involving securities fraud, market manipulation, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. As Gregory methodically copied the files onto encrypted drives, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system, Rosa maintained watch near the entrance, alert for any unexpected security personnel or early return by Martin. "We have everything we need," Gregory finally announced, disconnecting from the server and carefully returning it to its concealed housing, erasing all digital traces of their intrusion. "This is enough to clear my name and put Martin and his co-conspirators behind bars for decades." The relief that washed over Rosa's face reflected his own internal state, a cautious elation tempered by the knowledge that they had crossed a significant line tonight, one that could not be uncrossed regardless of the justice their actions might ultimately serve. Their strategic decision about how to utilize the explosive evidence required careful consideration of multiple factors: legal implications, public perception, and maximum impact. If we simply turn this over to the authorities, it might disappear into bureaucratic channels for months or even years, Gregory observed during an intense strategy session the following day. "Martin has considerable influence with certain regulatory officials. That's how he managed to fast-track the initial investigation against me. We need to create public pressure that makes burial or delay impossible." Rosa suggested a two-pronged approach: simultaneous submission of the evidence to multiple authorities, the SEC, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the New York Attorney General's office, coupled with a carefully curated release to select investigative journalists known for their integrity and tenacity. The key was timing. The story needed to break publicly at precisely the same moment that authorities received the evidence, creating a perfect storm that would preclude any potential interference or suppression. The day of reckoning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect autumn morning that seemed to mirror the clarity that had finally emerged from months of darkness and confusion. Gregory, dressed in a modest but professional suit purchased with Rosa's savings, stood before the federal courthouse alongside Diane Powell, an aggressive litigator who had agreed to represent him after reviewing portions of their evidence. Across the city, Rosa was executing her part of the plan, meeting with the investigative reporter from the New York Times who had agreed to break the story after being provided with irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. At precisely 9 a.m., as the markets opened, the story hit the Times website while simultaneously, Gregory and his attorney entered the federal building to formally submit their evidence and testimony to authorities who had been discreetly alerted to expect them. By noon, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet. Martin Thorne's office had been raided by federal agents, and trading in Cambridge financial shares had been suspended amid the tumult of revelations. The vindication of Gregory Lancaster unfolded over subsequent weeks, with a thoroughness that matched the comprehensive nature of the evidence he and Rosa had compiled. Martin Thorne and 4 executives from Cambridge Financial were indicted on multiple felony charges, with the prosecuting attorney describing the conspiracy as one of the most sophisticated and malicious financial frauds perpetrated in the past decade. Gregory's formal exoneration came through an unprecedented public statement from the SEC, acknowledging the grievous miscarriage of justice that had occurred and initiating proceedings to restore his seized assets and provide compensation for damages suffered. Financial publications that had once vilified him now published lengthy corrections and apologies, while former associates who had abandoned him scrambled to re-establish connections, claiming they had harbored doubts about his guilt all along. Through it all, Gregory maintained a dignified silence in public, declining interview requests and issuing only brief statements through his attorney, while privately focusing on rebuilding his life and honoring the loyalty that had saved him from oblivion. The most profound transformation, however, was not the external restoration of Gregory's reputation, but the internal recalibration of his values and purpose. In the sparse but comfortable apartment he had rented after receiving the first installment of his restitution payments, deliberately choosing a modest space far removed from his former penthouse, He sat across from Rosa one evening and finally gave voice to the decision that had been forming since their successful exposure of the conspiracy. "I want you to be my partner," he stated simply, placing a formal business proposal before her. Not an employee, not an advisor, an equal partner with matching equity stakes in whatever we build next. The business plan outlined a new kind of financial services firm focused on corporate accountability and ethical investment, leveraging Gregory's expertise and connections while incorporating the lessons learned through his fall and redemption. Rosa's initial protest, that she lacked the education and experience for such a role, was met with gentle but firm insistence. "You possess something far more valuable than any degree or certification: uncompromising integrity and the courage to act on it when everything was at stake. That's the foundation I want for this venture. Everything else can be learned." As the evening light bathed the simple room in golden hues, their conversation shifted from business structures to broader visions of impact and legacy. Two individuals fundamentally changed by adversity, now united in purpose to transform their hard-won wisdom into meaningful change that would extend far beyond their personal redemption story.